What's up, CCVT family? Hey, we are so excited about today. Thanks for tuning in to worship on Thursday night. And we continue our second week in the series, Us for Them, talking about race and racial reconciliation and just what's going on in our country right now with that, and really all over the world. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was just bring in a friend of ours that is an amazing man. His name is Dominic. His best friends call him Dom. So I'm going to call him Dom. He's wearing a CCBT t-shirt.
Yes.
Look at him going with that.
It's a very comfy shirt.
He is actually, if you've never met Dom, he's actually Brandon Botstett's best friend and is the best man in Brandon's wedding. So this coming up here, that's pretty exciting, right? You are the best man, right?
I think so. I don't think he's actually officially asked me to be his best,
but you're standing up there in a fancy suit next to him.
Yeah,
so,
I'll be up there. Arguably, he'll be fancier than I am, but I'll definitely be up there at least.
Well, Dom, in addition to that, just tell us a little bit about yourself. You are a friend of CCBT, and we love you a lot, but just tell us kind of what you're doing right now, what's going on in life these days.
Yeah. Hey, life is still going. It's going great. Right now I'm home in Richmond, Virginia. Currently I am set to leave for Australia in February of 2021. So hopefully we can make it through the rest of 2020 and it'll all be good. But yeah, so I'm here, just working part-time, helping out churches around the area until I leave. There I'll basically I'll be living in Brisbane, Australia, and basically doing what CCBT does, just over in Australia, just 12 hours away. So yeah, excited for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so we're getting to talk with Dom, who's going to be going into campus ministry, and that's really cool. CCBT Australia starting in 2021. It's going to be good stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
So we're really excited about that. And Dom, one of the, we talked about this before we jumped on here and started recording, but one of the things that we understand, even from Thursday night and getting to talk about the subject of race, I understand that my perspective is limited. I understand that as a white, straight man, I have never experienced injustice or oppression. I've never experienced the things that women in our culture have experienced, that the gay community has experienced, that Black people have experienced. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was just bring you in and talk to you and ask you some questions about your perspective, because I think it'll be helpful for our students, and I think it'll be good for all of us to see a perspective that may be different than what I've experienced or what I've seen. And I think this may help unify us. It may help bring unity and not division. And so what we're going to do, I'm just going to ask Dom a few questions, and he's just going to share. And so it'll be good.
Yeah, hopefully.
Cool. Well, I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
So here's the first thought and question, because my perspective is limited. I just want you to take some time here and just share with us, what do you see? Help us see what you see when you think about and see what is going on in our country right now and around the world when it comes to race. Just kind of start sharing your perspective. Yeah.
I think the biggest thing I see is just there's obviously a lot of hurt. And I don't think that, this whole, everyone's gone into lockdown. I don't think that helped anything at all. I think it just kind of, it's like having a Mentos in a Coke bottle and just letting it out. And it stinks. I think that really came to a culmination with the death of George Floyd, and all this outrage, all this being pent up at home, all this stuff, which was rightfully, like, there were still, it's not like injustice didn't stop with Corona. It was all still there, but it just was kind of put on the back burner. And then to immediately come into it with this stuff, there's just been a lot of hurt, I think, on the side of the Black community. And a lot of what I've seen is a lot of people trying to either be dismissive about it, or be on the opposite end, be so extreme about it that, like, anybody who doesn't agree with you is out to get you. And you see this very much, like, if you do any, like, research into the Black Lives Movement as an organization, it's very, very extremist, very, it's not, I think if you are a Christian, it's very anti-Christian, anti-religion, and anti-establishment, which is not good. I don't think it's biblical. But as a movement, to say, you know, what we see right now is that there are still these injustices, there are still these issues that we need to deal with as a country. And then on top of that, people are saying, saying like all lives matter. And it's like, as a Christian, you obviously have the understanding that, of course, it's, I mean,
Yeah.
it's literally like saying 2 + 2 = 4. We all know that equals, we all know that that's right. But what's happening right now is that there is this hurt, and there is this experience that people are going through, and people have, that so many people are refusing to listen to, and to dive into. And I really think about, most recently, Jacob Blake, who, if you haven't read up, he was shot 7 times, and he clearly, however you feel about it, being shot 7 times, I don't think is is any kind of like safeguard for a police officer. And again, however you feel about it, what my biggest concern was in that whole story was that his 2 kids were in the car, and they watched their dad, or uncle, or whoever, they watched him get shot 7 times, like, in front of him. And I don't care what color you are, that's going to do something to you. That's going to traumatize you as a human being. Like, that is traumatic, and that's going to cause, that causes PTSD right there. And then having the world say, well, he should have just listened to the cops, he should have just listened, is kind of, it's literally like, telling a kid who's upset, and like, get over it. Like, if you want to break it down to what it really is, and what a lot of people, I think, are experiencing, and you might not even realize this, because I've had a lot of friends who I've, like, looked at and I was like, are you really saying that? Like, because they don't realize that the basic thing that you're saying is get over it. When you're trying to, when you're trying to justify any reasoning that anybody should be shot 7 times or anybody should be killed. And these kids are experiencing this, and this is what a lot of Black kids are experiencing, all around the country, all around the world. And the problem is a lot of those experiences they're not really publicized, because it's nothing big, and it's nothing, I guess, newsworthy of, but again, these kids are experiencing this, and we as people, and I myself have had this issue of not being willing to put myself in somebody else's shoes and experience, simply be like, I haven't been able to experience some of this stuff, And I recognize that I do come from a very different perspective of my mom. My mom's white, my dad is black, and um, growing up, my dad left me and my mom um,
Mm.
before I was born. And so already like right out of the bat, my perception on the black community is already negative. And what it means to be black is already negative. And so now I want to relate more to the community that seems to accept me, which is the white community. And like all my family's white, um, my aunts and uncles. And so like, that's how I grew up, and realizing that I come from a place of privilege, of a place where um, a lot of black people haven't been able to experience. Um, but at the same time, being able to identify with that, and still being able to, identify with the struggles, because like whatever community I grew up in, my skin is still darker than most.
Yeah.
And um I was telling my friend, because he was getting all of he was talking to me about this, and we were discussing this, and I looked at him, and I didn't know how to like get to him any other way of like, okay. And then I had another friend who is Hispanic, and I think we both kind of have a similar, not necessarily like similar story, but kind of like a similar experience of, to my friend, of, hey, next time you're driving and you see a cop and you see that cop pull out, tell me like what you're thinking, because
Mm.
most of the time most people aren't thinking that they're like, this is going to be like, this is it, like
Yeah.
I could die here. For a lot of people of color, whether they're black or Hispanic, that's the thoughts that are going through their mind because of what they see, what they've experienced. And for Jacob Blake's kids, like, that is probably going to run through their minds of like, they're driving and they see a cop and they get pulled over, and
Mm-hmm.
like just thinking of like, this could very well be like, this could be it, like I don't know how this cop is going to react. And because even when we do everything that we're told, stuff still happens. And
Yeah.
I think on the opposite side of that, I think most people know that not all cops are bad. Not
Right.
all not all police officers are out to get you. And I know that. And I think a lot of people know that. But the truth is, you don't know whether you're dealing with a good cop and a bad cop. And
Right.
that's, I think, a huge issue of, you shouldn't have to be wondering, are you dealing with a bad cop or a good cop? You should
Mm-hmm.
always trust that you're dealing with a good cop. And I think at the root of everything, that is the biggest issue, is that the system itself needs to be refined, needs to be changed because of that.
Yeah.
Because I've seen a lot of things go around of like, police are dealing in a profession where you can't have good cops or bad cops. You can only have good cops. And if you are a bad cop, you need to rethink your life and rethink your profession. Like if you
Yeah.
have any history of any kind of racial profiling or anything like that, or just not even just any kind of, you know, stuff in your past that might lead somebody to think that, hey, he might not be best suited for this position where he is called to serve and
Yeah.
protect. Um, and I think that's a huge thing that
Yeah.
that a lot of people are experiencing and a lot of people want to get through, etc.
Yeah. Definitely. And so when you think about like your own experience and um, you know, growing up or even right now, um, what do you see in um, the Black community or you being mixed? What have you seen and experienced that you know maybe that I have never experienced as uh, a white man. Like I've never been, for instance, you mentioned getting pulled over. Um, I've never been pulled over for being white or been suspicious, someone be suspicious of me because I'm walking down the street in a neighborhood that may be, but we're reading stories about guys that are working and
Yeah.
they're black and they're in a mostly white neighborhood and someone calls the cops on them.
Yeah.
And it's just really sad. Like it's just really a terrible thing. So like, how do you see any of that? Like, have you experienced any of that in your life? Has it been, you know, has that been something that you've kind of seen? And what's your perspective on that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
The things that are not someone, something horrendous, like someone being shot or someone being murdered, which is horrible and terrible and should not be happening. But what about, someone walking to the other side of the street because
Yeah.
or what about being just pulled over or whatever? What do you see there?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've definitely, I I'm grateful that I haven't experienced a lot of what um, a lot of my friends have gone through. You know, I think one of the like I've never had to do a the one thing I hear a lot of like is always being pulled aside for a random search at an airport.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
which is interesting because I've been told like I look Middle Eastern, I look Hispanic, I look
Right.
Indian, and I'm like, okay, well, that just is no good for me because
Right.
I'm just I'm losing on all accounts. But I do think like people don't recognize their subtle tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
And you might not like blatantly say of like, like, oh, I'm not a racist. And I think a lot of
Right.
people aren't, and I wouldn't say that. But a lot of people like you do notice like them like going to the side of the street, or if I'm walking and like um they aren't, you know, not necessarily like to say that they have to get to the side, but they're just kind of like walking and expecting me to go to the street or anything like that. And it's these things, and I'm very slow to say those things are like racially charged, because a lot of them
Mm-hmm.
aren't. But
Yeah.
again, there it was funny, because I went to Walmart and there was a guy who was at the he's at the like the exit and saying like goodbye to people, goodbye, and he's like saying people have a nice day, um, and there was this older couple, and this guy was like really friendly, really nice, and then there was this black lady in front of me, and he didn't say a word, didn't even look at her, and then he
Mm.
like didn't say a word, and I stayed back to hear if he said bye, and he said, and he like said goodbye, and he was like saying like nice things like, oh, have a nice day to these people behind me, to this white couple behind me. And he was like an older gentleman, and but it's things like those,
Yeah.
that I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna like go out into the street and say he needs to be arrested, or he needs to be, he needs to, be,
Right.
yeah. But it is something that just like makes me go, like, really? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to like put, I don't want to put a name to this because it could just be him, but it's one of those things of like, when you say hi to somebody, and like just a random stranger's like, oh, how's it going, you having a
Yeah.
nice day, etc., etc., and then there is a person of color and you just completely ignore them,
Yeah.
that speaks a ton, because I don't initially assume that you're racist, but for a lot of people that is their perspective of, if you initially treat me different than this
Yeah.
white person in front of me, and I think more than anything, I've experienced a lot of that.
Hmm.
And I think my mom would be able to give more examples of, when I was in school, certain teachers that might have been a little, I guess, had favorite students,
Yeah.
and favorite students. Um, but again, I think a lot of things that are causing issue is that people are really quick to say a lot of things are racially charged. Um,
Hmm.
Granted, we have issues of injustice, we have issues of systemic racism, um, but to say that everything is, you know, is because of, this person is racist, I think puts us in a dangerous place, and
Yeah.
we need to be careful of walking that line of, okay, this was racially charged, but or um or this was just a bad cop or a bad person, um
Hmm.
because I think you can take situations like Charlottesville, that happened a few years back, in
Yeah.
that march on Charlottesville, and see the differences in how the world is reacting to that and how the world is reacting to this, and say, okay, that's racially charged, and that is a huge issue. That clearly something's wrong, and we need to get
Yeah.
something done with that. Um, and and I don't again, a lot of it is just knowing and being careful and trying to stay true to. I think a lot of black people, a lot of mixed people, I think, would have a different experience of, like, how do we stay true to our our identity as both black and white, or whatever
Hmm.
you're mixed with. How do you stay true to your identity, while also walking the line of, uh, I mean, if particularly if you call yourself a Christian, how do you walk? What is the line you walk, and where do you need to say enough is enough, and where do you need to say, all right, maybe we need to take a step back and look at this from a different perspective. Um, and I think Jesus modeled that. Obviously, he modeled it perfectly because
Yeah.
he's Jesus. What else can he do?
Yeah.
But I think the story, a lot of people go to um, a lot of people go to when we talk about, like, race and identity, Romans, where Paul says there's neither Jew nor Greek, um, free nor slave, man nor woman. And that's true. Like, when you are in Christ, that's your identity. You
Yeah.
happen to be a Christian who is a man, or who is
Hmm.
white, or who is a woman, who is black. You are a Christian who is this. That is your first allegiance. But again, that I think that verse, not used in the wrong context and used in the wrong way, can be very hurtful, because
Yeah.
um, Paul isn't saying ignore your identity as a Gentile.
Yeah.
He's just
Yeah.
saying, as a Christian, you are this, but
Hmm.
you're still a Gentile. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean you should be treated differently, because as a Christian, and that's like the big thing, is that the Gentiles, in the context of the letter to the Romans, is that the Gentiles are being treated differently than the Jews in the church. And Paul is writing to say, hey, you guys shouldn't be treating these people differently just because they're Gentiles,
Yeah.
because this. And so he's writing the letter to the oppressors, saying, you should stop oppressing people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think people use that a lot to say to the oppressed, hey, you know, we're all one, you're not oppressed, and stuff like that.
Right.
Um, I think the better story is the one, is in John. I think it's John 4, 4 or 8, where Jesus is at the well with a Samaritan woman,
Yeah.
a different race, a different gender, like, by all kinds of cultural accounts, she should be treated very differently. And Jesus doesn't choose that. In fact, he chooses the exact opposite. He chooses to enter into her story. He chooses to, um, to go into her experiences, and then he chooses to reveal himself as the Messiah to this woman, this Samaritan woman. And I think that is a story that when somebody like says like, something about Romans, I'd say, well, what about John? Like, what about Jesus and John, where he clearly goes into this woman's experience and goes into this woman's story. And so I think there's a huge disconnect with Christians on how to properly handle it and handle scripture as a whole. Because I think overall scripture would speak to, just read any of the prophets, all about justice and taking care of the poor and the widowed. And it might say something about our Western version of Christianity when it sounds like the prophets are speaking more about us than they are about Israel.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And when we see that in like Romans, the gospel is tearing down walls and divisions where the oppressor stops oppressing and brings justice instead, and brings love and grace. And, but you also see in the John story of the Samaritan woman, it's always been so interesting to me that when the disciples and the religious people see this and hear about this, they're appalled.
Yeah.
They're at the very least shocked and surprised. At the very most, they are angry.
Yeah.
They are, and we see that even in the New Testament church. We see, Peter go and eat at a Gentile man's house named Cornelius, and he comes back, and part of the church, part of the followers of Jesus are angry with him. They're mad. And, when we look at our response, and we look at that, I love how you said, when we start looking like these prophets are speaking to Israel, but actually they're talking to us too. Man, a lot of things need to change in that regard. And we're back. It is night now. We haven't been talking for the last 10 hours. I just had to take my kid to school. The Uber didn't show up to take my 12-year-old to school, and I had to do it. So sorry, Dom. But we're back now.
That's okay. We're back.
And we've got another question just to kind of throw your way, Dominic, and or Dom, I should say, because we're friends.
You can call me whatever you want.
Yeah, that's right.
Just call me Hey You.
So, Hey You. But this next question just kind of goes a little bit hand in hand, where I would just love for you to share your heart about what your response is to everything that's going on as a follower of Jesus, as just a man that is just shared, your viewpoint and your perspective of everything that's going on. What has been your response? What action are you taking, and really what would you encourage a bunch of college students to be doing or thinking about or responding? What advice do you have for them as well? So kind of what you're doing, and then what they could do.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of, and truth, like, again, my experience is very different. And so I've even had to, go and kind of relearn a lot of stuff, and look again at a lot of stuff. One of the things that I think I didn't get growing up was a lot of like black role models. I had one in particular who I remember, and I've had people in my life who've been able to be very influential in my thinking, but a lot of them have been white. And so for me, like, there was never that kind of person, that representation that I found as like a solid kind of influence for myself growing up. And even like growing up in college, even going to college, like I went to like you, I went to Bible college, and there's just a lack of Black voices in like especially in my the tradition that I grew up in. It was just not something that I was around and that I experienced a lot of. But currently I'm in seminary right now, and just in that short time, just have been told about a ton of different Black voices. James Cone is the big one right now for me. He wrote a book, and I think everyone should read this book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. I think it doesn't explain everything, and it definitely doesn't like explain away a lot of the stuff going on in America. But if you want to know what Black people were experiencing and how it has affected us, like even now today, that's a good book to read. And so just learning more about things and a lot of like history, realizing that a lot of history has been whitewashed, and not obviously not all in the best ways, but honestly going back and relearning, like I remember in middle school, we never talked about Tulsa. Yeah, I can't pronounce it right.
Yeah.
But like the Tulsa riots in Oklahoma, like all those things, like the LA riots. We were never taught these things, and we were never taught about like the injustices that have been done. We were taught about slavery. Slavery is wrong, and then we moved past it, but we never talked about how it affects the systems we see today. And so the biggest thing for me right now is going back and relearning those things, educating yourself, educating myself on different ways where I think the help is really needed, of like living in Richmond, and being kind of like the center of, if you saw in the news, like the center of this monument debate on whether we should have
Right.
statues and stuff like that. And that was definitely interesting. Like going down, where all that's happening is called Monument Avenue, and like going down, seeing all these monuments that, I wouldn't think twice about when I was growing up. And now they're like covered in graffiti and all these different things. And it's cool to see, like, it is cool to see people like coming together, and there's still a little stuff around it. But the reality of that situation is, I think that we're missing the point of what needs to happen. Granted, do I think those monuments should have been in a museum? Yeah. Do I think we need a statue of anybody, really? No, not really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean, what is it ultimately? What is it for? It's to remember that person, and it's like, well, you can do that with a museum in a different kind of context. Granted, I do understand, like, if you see this monument, it is to a person who isn't that great of a person. I understand taking it down, but I think all of that was kind of like missing the point. And being able to like say, like, oh, we took down those statues, is kind of like a false victory of, we got these statues. What did we really do? Like, these guys are already dead. And
Yeah.
so I don't think like a lot of victories are won there. I think where we need to focus energy, both as like Christians, as Black people, as white people, is focusing on, honestly, like focusing on policy, focusing on being invested in the communities that we're in, and being invested in the local governments that we're in the local areas that we're in. And I'm not entirely sure how that plays out at Virginia Tech. But like when you go home, is like, what area are you in? Is there this systemic racism that I can help influence by being involved in, my community, by being involved in all these different things? And I think ultimately that's the big thing, is that like a lot of churches aren't involved in those things. And so like people, like I've seen a lot of pastors like wondering, it's like, why don't we have like more people from, the Black community coming to my church or coming to the churches? And I'm like, it's because you're not in the community. It's like you're not
Right.
going to those places, and you're not investing in those people and loving those people. And you say, well, they've already, they've got like their church. And I'm like, okay, well, if they have their church, partner with that church, go to that church. If they're doing some kind of event, like maybe the Black Baptist church over down the street is doing an event, and you go to whatever church, maybe saying, hey, this church is doing this event, I want to help do that. And I think a lot of this is stepping out of your comfort zone. And again, like I grew up in a predominantly white Christian church, and even stepping into that kind of space for me is stepping out of my comfort zone a little bit. But those are the things that need to happen. Like if, and that's the truth, is like, if anybody asked me of like, what can I do to really help? I was like, just be there for people. Be there for people. And if you have friends who are Black, ask them how they're doing, because most of them might be, honestly, a lot of them might be like scared. Like they very might be scared of like, they don't know what's going to happen. Especially it's just a crazy, just few months that we're living in right now. And we're going into, a lot of us are like scared of like what could happen, where this is going and where this all ends. Overall, I think if anything, 2020 has kind of like shown us that, like, people say like 2020 is the worst year. And it's not the best. It's definitely not the best.
No, it is not the best.
Yeah. But I think what we have seen in 2020 is that people are finally like, enough is enough. And like we can say 2020 is like, and that's the truth, is like, either we are going to just do the same old things, or in 2020 is just going to be like, 2010 and 2000, or going into 2021 in this next decade, we're actually going to change some stuff, and we're actually going to get down to destroying and taking out all these systems that are keeping not just Black people, but white people, Hispanics, Asians, Muslims, gays, and like all these marginalized communities are affected by a lot of these issues. And I think that we're finally going to be like, enough is enough, and we're tired of it. I want to ask if we can curse, but I don't want to curse. But yeah,
we'll let the students who are watching this decide whether you can or not, and if they've ever heard me curse. And the answer is probably yes.
Awesome.
So
Great.
But no, that's good. Is there anything else that you would say, like, hey, here's something that you could be doing? Anything else that you think that comes to mind that would be in addition to kind of what you already said?
Not like completely different. I think, again, the biggest thing is actually, because I think we all want to see change on a big scale, but it's going to start with like small scale stuff of checking in with your Black friends. It's going to start with like looking at the history of racism and seeing how the systems we have now are, how they are affected by racism. And it is going to take those small steps of just being together and being involved in each other's stories. And I think, again, like for me, that's the biggest thing. And that's what I see Jesus doing as a Christian. And I really think like for me, story is that bridge between ignorance and understanding
Mm,
of even
yeah.
even for me, um like if I can get a Trump supporter to like sit down and tell me like, here's my story, here's why, I can be like, okay, I get it. I don't agree with it, but I get it. Or
Yeah.
if somebody who is like a Biden supporter is like, you know, I get it, and I get where you're coming from, and I get your story, and we may not always agree, but from where I'm standing, I get it and I understand um, why you would do that, and um, like empathy is a huge part of that. um, and I think if any college student, while they're going through school, one thing they can work on is learning how to empathize with other people, and learning how to empathize with uh, oppressed people. um, I think that's good. And also, I mean, if you're ever interested in like the theology side of it, looking up um, looking up like different like Black theology, feminine theology, all these different things. I mean, there's theology for everything. It's
Yeah.
crazy. um, but I think a lot of them, I don't always agree with everything that they say, but I think again it's more of that empathy kind of experience of, okay, you've been oppressed, here's how you view God. Because the truth is, like, just like how we view, I mean, we view everything from the point of our own point of view. Like, we
Yeah.
view God from our own point of view, and we view the story of Jesus from our own point of view. um, and I think learning how other people can view God and view Jesus is also a good way to start and kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah. Definitely. 100%. And, we kind of talk about it in at least CCBT terms where we've always said, there is room at the table for anyone to come and
Mm,
like be in our lives. And really that's not just like a CCBT mantra that we have. It's like we want our lives to become gatherings of people where we hear people's stories, we listen, we're quick to listen and slow to speak, and we're slow to become angry. I mean, what incredible advice right now,
yeah,
the divisiveness of our nation, where we would hear one another's stories and perspectives, and I wouldn't try to tell you what your perspective is or what you should think or what you should do. um, and we should always just be willing. A table is a great equalizer. When
yeah,
someone sits down at a table, you can't tell how tall or short they are. And when you start to have a conversation with someone and you begin to get to know them and love them, that is something that makes us willing to hear their perspective and their story. And I think for a long time, there have been certain groups of people that certain groups of people have treated as inhuman. They've just kind of
yeah,
said that person is not a human created in the image of God. And whether they did that purposely or whether they uh, were just raised a certain way and taught something that they had to unlearn and repent from, we just kind of see that all the time. It's like, man, uh, it's impossible for me to care about someone until like I hear their story and where they're
yeah,
coming from. It's
yeah,
so easy to keep people at an arm's distance and kind of say, oh, I don't want to hear it because, man, you're wrong and I know I'm right. Well,
yeah,
no, like let me hear this and let's talk about it. And man, there's empathy, there's compassion, there's actually love
yeah,
in that regard, even where there's not agreement.
yeah,
And I think you said that really well. And I think, one of the things that I think justice talks about is, you know, helping people. Like if I'm up here and someone's here, I help them. If I have a shirt and they don't, I try to pull them up to where I am and give them a shirt.
Yeah.
in a simplistic way. My friend said it really well. He said, stairs are great for someone who has legs that work,
Yeah.
but they're not great for someone who's paralyzed. And so what do? Do we just continue just building stairs and saying, hey, y'all figure it out?
Yeah.
No, we started making ways and building systems to be able to adapt and say, this is an injustice. You should have justice here.
Yeah.
And I think we can bring that into what we're talking about with race and with reconciliation and with racism that is still existing today, and working on this. So I don't know. I think that's just an amazing thing to hear from you. And I guess one of the things that we're learning in this series is, if our experience and the people that we're surrounding ourselves with are all the same as us, we're doing this wrong. And instead of it becoming us for them, it's going to continue to be us or them if we continue to just not build a bridge to one another. And so that's what we're about, and that's what we're trying to do. And I appreciate your insights and you sharing with us, because that's going to help us to continue in that mission.
Yeah.
And so really cool.
Yeah. And again, I would just say that, like, my experience is also different. And so, like, learning more, cause I mean, you'd be surprised, of a college campus, of how many students. I'm sure that there are some students who have a different life experience than you do, who might have not had such a comfortable life as a lot of us have experienced. And getting to know those students and learning about what they've experienced and how they're handling everything is an excellent way to like, again, the biggest thing is loving your neighbor. And I mean, how are you loving your neighbor if you don't even know your neighbor? Is a big thing for me. Like, I wouldn't say that anybody who I consider my neighbor is not somebody who I don't know. If I know them, they're my neighbor. Granted, there are, like, you can do good things for people you don't know. But loving your neighbor well involves actually getting to know your neighbor and actually learning from them and gaining their experience.
Not fight their wars. We will not fall in line. 'Cause if it's us or them, it's us for them, it's us for them.